When did you have to save someone you hated? I was 7 when I lost my innocence. That was the first time my mom first told me I had to be nice to her friend because we needed money for groceries. By the time I was 9, it was just another part of life. Different men would show up and hand her crumpled bills. I learned to go somewhere else in my head. The day everything changed started like any other. Mom was shaking and sweating. She needed a fix. But when Jerry showed up that afternoon, something was different. He brought a friend. I tried to run, but Mom grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. That's when our neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, knocked on the door. She was bringing over mail that got delivered to her by mistake. And I guess she figured out what was going on, because the cops came within an hour. Mom cried and held me tight in front of them like she actually cared. "I'll protect you from now on, baby," she whispered in my ear while the officers took notes. "Those men will never hurt you again. Mommy's going to get better. We're going to be a real family." For a second, I actually believed her. The state gave her a second chance. Rehab instead of jail if she cooperated with the investigation. She went through the program and came out talking about being a new person. Got a job at Walmart, rented us a little apartment. For 3 whole months, I had a normal mom who packed lunches and helped with homework. She'd braid my hair before school and read stories at bedtime. We even went to the movies once. Then her old dealer Trevor found her. I heard them arguing through the thin walls. He wanted money she owed from before. Mom didn't have it, but she knew how to get it. When I saw her pull that dress out of the closet, I tried to call Mrs. Anderson, but Mom ripped the phone from my hand. "You're going to be nice to Trevor's friend," she said, "just this once." When CPS showed up for the surprise home visit the next week, Mom had already coached me on what to say. "Tell them you made it all up," she said. "Tell them you saw it on TV and wanted attention. If they take you away, you'll end up somewhere worse." So I lied. Told the social worker I was confused before, that Mom never let anyone hurt me. The case got closed. It went on for 3 more years. Mom got smarter about it. Only men she knew wouldn't talk. Never at our apartment. Always had a cover story ready. She'd cry afterwards sometimes and promise this was the last time, that she was saving money to get us out of this life. But the money always went up her arm or in her lungs. I finally got placed in foster care at 13 after Mom overdosed and left me with her dealer for 2 weeks. He didn't touch me, but only because I was too old for his clients. My foster parents were decent people. Quiet house, regular meals. They didn't ask questions when I woke up screaming. I threw myself into school. Straight A's meant scholarships. Scholarships meant college. College meant never being helpless again. My criminal justice professor junior year was a former FBI agent. He saw something in me during a lecture on human trafficking, pulled me aside after class. "You understand this material differently than the others," he said. I didn't confirm anything, but he knew. I graduated top of my class and requested assignment to the Crimes Against Children unit. Every kid I pulled out of hell was a small victory. I'd been an agent for 5 years when my partner knocked on my hotel room door during a case in Detroit. "We've got a weird one," he said. "Woman turned up at the field office claiming she has information about Blue Raven 47. Says she'll only talk to you." He showed me the security footage on his phone. It was Mom, 20 years older and rough looking, but definitely her. She was fidgeting in the interview room and kept looking at the door like she expected someone to burst through it. I hadn't seen her since I testified at her parole hearing when I turned 18. Told the board exactly what she'd done. She got 10 more years. Now here she was in my interview room. "Hi, baby," she said when I walked in. Like we'd just seen each other yesterday. Like she hadn't sold my childhood for drug money. "You look good. Professional." I sat down across from her and pulled out my notepad. "You have information about Blue Raven 47. My face drained of color. It was the online predator we had been searching for months. I've been living with this guy. Met him at rehab. He's always on his computer." She leaned forward. "I saw what was on his screen. Kids, live streams. He's the one you've been looking for. What information do you have?" "I know where he lives. His real name. Everything." My pen stopped moving. "He's got a kid coming this weekend. Flew her in from Ohio. Told her parents she won a modeling contest." She was watching my face. "I can give you his address, but I need protection first." I left her in the interview room and went to the bathroom. Every instinct screamed to let her rot, but there was a kid flying in from Ohio in less than 72 hours. I turned on the cold water and stuck my whole face under the faucet, letting it shock me back into focus. My hands were shaking as I dried off with the rough paper towels. I pulled out my phone and texted my partner that we needed our supervisor down here right now. This was bigger than just us. Walking back through the hallway took forever, even though it was only 50 feet. I stopped at the one-way glass and watched her for a minute. She was picking at her fingernails, ripping the cuticles until they bled. Same exact thing she used to do when she was coming down 20 years ago. Her leg was bouncing under the table and she kept scratching at her arms. She was definitely using again. The door felt heavier than usual when I pushed it open. My partner was already there with Darren Hodge, our SSA, who must have been in the building already. Darren took a lead chair across from her while I sat in the corner with my notepad. Mom's eyes kept darting to me, but I focused on writing down every word she said. She repeated the stuff about the kid coming this weekend, adding details about how this guy had been planning it for weeks. Darren leaned forward and explained in his calm voice that any protection deal had to go through the U.S. Attorney's Office. She'd need to provide real intelligence they could verify before anything got approved. Mom started crying then, ugly sobs that made her whole body shake. She kept saying this guy would kill her if he found out she talked, that he had connections everywhere, that she was taking a huge risk just being here. Darren nodded and said he understood, but the process was the process. We moved her to a holding room down the hall while Darren called AUSA Emmett Harper. The room had a couch and a water cooler instead of just metal chairs. I made it to the bathroom just in time to throw up everything I'd eaten that day. My body was rejecting this whole situation. I rinsed my mouth and went back to find Emmett had already arrived. He was one of those prosecutors who looked like he'd been born in a suit. He sat down with Mom and laid out exactly what would happen. She'd tell them everything she knew, submit to a polygraph to verify she wasn't lying, testify in court if they needed her to. Only after they confirmed her information was real would they even consider witness protection. Mom agreed to everything immediately. While she was getting processed through intake, Dion Hensley from our cybercrimes unit pulled up everything we had on Blue Raven 47. The handle had been active for 3 years across multiple platforms. 12 confirmed victims that we knew about in 5 different states, ages ranging from 11 to 15. We'd been tracking this ghost for months with nothing solid until now. Dion showed me the timeline on his screen. If Mom was right, we had less than 72 hours before a 13-year-old girl from Columbus got delivered to this monster. He started firing off preservation letters to every ISP and platform we'd identified while I got on the phone with the Ohio field office. They'd need to start checking checking for missing kids or families who thought their daughter won some contest. Mom came back 2 hours later with a female agent who'd been assigned to stay with her. She sat down and started talking faster than the stenographer could type. The guy's name was Conrad Hewitt, at least that's what he told her. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in suburban Detroit, paid his rent in cash every month. She described his daily routine, how he left for work at exactly 7:30 every morning, came back at 6. He had 3 different laptops he kept locked in a safe, only used public Wi-Fi, never his home internet, paid for everything with cash or cryptocurrency. She gave us the address and apartment number, even drew a rough layout of the place on a legal pad. That evening we drove past the building in an unmarked car. It was one of those complexes that looked nice from the outside, but you knew was falling apart inside. Sure enough, there was a guy matching Mom's description taking out his trash. Medium height, brown hair, walked with a slight limp she'd mentioned. The complex had security cameras at the entrance and in the lobby. We'd need warrants for that footage, but at least we had something to work with now. Back at the office, the whole team was running on coffee and adrenaline. Darren had a judge on standby for emergency warrants. Dion was digging through every piece of data we had on Conrad Hewitt, finding 3 different identities with that name, but only one in Detroit. Emmett was preparing the legal framework for a raid if Mom's information checked out. I sat at my desk staring at the photos of Blue Raven 47's victims we'd collected over the years. Kids who'd been lured with promises of modeling contracts, video game tournaments, meet and greets with influencers. All of them had that same hollow look in their eyes afterward. Now we might actually catch this monster before he destroyed another life. There's something really strange about how Mom just happens to be living with the exact predator they've been hunting for months. What are the odds of that? Her whole story feels too convenient, showing up right when there's supposedly a kid in danger this weekend. I'm curious why she's really here now after all these years. Emmett walked over to my desk and set down a legal pad covered in notes. We need more than her word for a search warrant, he said. I pulled up the county records database while he called the utility companies. The apartment Mom described was rented to a Charles Henderson 6 months ago, right when she said they met at rehab. The power bill showed crazy high usage for a 1-bedroom place, probably from running multiple computers. We printed everything and started building our probable cause packet. The next afternoon, they put me in the observation room for Mom's formal recorded interview. She sat across from 2 agents describing how Conrad showed her pictures on his computer. My hands started shaking when she talked about his collection. The images she described matched our victim profiles from cases going back 3 years. She knew details only someone who'd seen the actual photos would know. She told them about watching him use cryptocurrency exchanges on his laptop, how he had 4 different phones that he kept in a locked drawer. Dion was already at his desk tracking the digital breadcrumbs she gave us. I wrote down every detail in my notebook, trying to stay focused on the facts instead of the sick feeling in my stomach. We called the Ohio ICAC task force, and they confirmed a 13-year-old girl named Ashley had gone missing 2 days ago. Her parents said she won a modeling contest online and bought her a plane ticket to Detroit after talking to an agent who knew all the right things to say. The airline confirmed a ticket in Ashley's name for Saturday morning at 7:30. The pickup contact was listed as David Morrison, but the phone number traced back to a burner purchased at a gas station near Conrad's apartment 2 weeks ago. Darren called us all into the conference room that evening for a strategy meeting. Half the team wanted to let the pickup happen so we could arrest Conrad with the victim and strengthen our case. I stood up so fast my chair fell over. "We can't risk a child for evidence," I said, my voice cracking. Darren looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. We'd intercept Ashley at the airport. While we were planning, Dion's computer started pinging with recovered chat logs from a gaming platform. The username Blue Raven 47 had been grooming kids for months using the same phrases Mom described. One conversation from last week mentioned the modeling contest that Ashley thought she won. The predator had spent weeks building trust, learning her dreams, promising to make her famous. That same evening, we moved Mom to a hotel downtown with marshal protection. Tyler Hayes got assigned to her security detail. She was going through withdrawal bad, shaking and sweating through her clothes, begging for something to help with the pain. Tyler just sat in the corner reading his newspaper while she paced the room. The marshals had dealt with plenty of difficult witnesses before. Emmett pulled me aside the next morning and said I needed to step back from direct contact with Mom because of conflict of interest. He was scheduling a formal proffer session for 10 o'clock, but I couldn't be in the room. I agreed right away, actually relieved to have some professional distance. I'd stay on the investigation, but someone else would handle Mom. Around 3 that afternoon, our surveillance team called in. Conrad had left his apartment carrying 3 large duffel bags and drove to a storage facility on 8 Mile Road. They couldn't follow him inside without blowing their cover, but they got the facility name and watched him go into Unit B47. He stayed inside for 20 minutes, then left with just 1 bag. The team followed him back to his apartment where he spent the rest of the day inside. We ran the storage facility through our databases and found it was paid for with cash, month to month, under the name Robert Hayes. The timeline matched up with when our first victim disappeared 18 months ago. Dion started working on a warrant for the storage unit while Emmett prepared the arrest plan for Saturday morning at the airport. We had agents stationed at every entrance and exit. 2 teams would grab Conrad the second he showed up, while another team would intercept Ashley before she left the secure area. Mom's information kept checking out. Every detail she gave us led somewhere real. The cryptocurrency exchanges Conrad used were the same ones we'd been tracking for months, but couldn't connect to a real person. Now we had a name and address. The gaming platform chat logs showed a clear pattern of grooming that matched our psychological profile exactly. By Friday night, we had enough for search warrants on the apartment, the storage unit, and his car. The judge signed them at 11:30 that night. We'd execute them right after the airport arrest to prevent anyone from destroying evidence. I went home but couldn't sleep, just kept thinking about Ashley and all the kids we hadn't saved in time. Mom might be a terrible person, but her information was going to stop a monster. Saturday morning came fast, and we were all at the airport by 5:30, everyone in position and ready. The arrest team moved in at 6:15 when Conrad walked through the security checkpoint. He dropped his carry-on and tried to run, but the agents had him on the ground in seconds. His phone was still unlocked when they grabbed it, and Dion immediately started pulling data, while Conrad screamed about his rights. We hit all 3 locations at the same time with the warrants. Conrad's apartment was mostly empty except for a few laptops and a stack of prepaid phones. The extended stay hotel room had been cleaned out, but the forensics team found hair samples and fingerprints everywhere. The storage unit downtown had boxes of old hard drives and USB sticks that would take weeks to process. Back at the field office, Mom was pacing in the interview room when I walked in with the arrest report. She grabbed the papers from my hand and scanned them before looking up at me with those same desperate eyes I remembered from childhood. I have more information, she said. I sat down and pulled out my notepad while she leaned forward across the table. She told me Conrad had another storage unit across town where he kept backup drives, said she followed him there once and memorized the location, even though she knew I wouldn't believe her after the phone incident. Her hands were shaking as she drew a crude map on a piece of paper showing the facility near 8 Mile. We drove out to check it that afternoon and found the lock had been changed recently. The manager pulled up the security footage on his computer, and there was someone matching Conrad's description visiting the night after the airport incident. He was carrying a box when he went in, but came out empty-handed 20 minutes later. The warrant came through by evening, and we opened the unit to find it mostly empty, except for some old furniture and boxes of paperwork. Emmett suggested checking the dumpster out back since people often threw stuff away when they knew cops were coming. We pulled on gloves and started digging through bags of trash and broken furniture. Near the bottom was a damaged external hard drive that someone had tried to destroy with a hammer. The plastic casing was cracked, but the forensics team said they might be able to recover something. 3 days later, they called me down to the lab where they had partial data up on the screen. It looked like financial records with columns of numbers and cryptocurrency wallet addresses. The tech pointed to entries that appeared to be a client ledger with dates and transaction amounts going back 2 years. Each entry had a code name and payment amount in Bitcoin that had been converted to cash. The ledger showed deposits at Bitcoin ATMs around the city with specific locations and times. We pulled security footage from one ATM on Woodward and saw a woman making deposits every few days. Her face was clear in the footage, and when we ran her plates from the parking lot camera, we got a hit. She worked at a co-working space downtown according to her social media profiles. Darren and I drove over there the next morning and found her at the reception desk. She went pale when we showed our badges and asked to speak with her privately. In the conference room, she denied everything at first and said she didn't know any Conrad. When we showed her the ATM footage, her whole story fell apart. She started crying and admitted Conrad paid her $500 a week to make the deposits. She gave him access to the co-working space after hours where he used their computers for what he called business he didn't want traced. She showed us the keycard logs proving he was there almost every night for the past 6 months. The stress was getting to me bad by this point, and I wasn't sleeping more than 2 hours a night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those kids from the videos we'd found. The FBI had been pushing me to take their emergency counseling sessions, and I finally gave in. The therapist was this older woman who specialized in agents working these kinds of cases. She helped me work through how my past and present were crashing together, but I still woke up most nights covered in sweat. Emmett kept reminding me that we saved the girl from Ohio and she was safe with her parents now. It helped to focus on that one victory, even though the case kept getting more twisted, and Mom's involvement made everything harder. Then Dion burst into my office with his laptop saying we had a problem. A new live stream had surfaced on the dark web with metadata suggesting it was local to Detroit. The room in the video had that generic extended stay hotel look with the same type of furniture we'd seen before. Dion was already working to narrow down possible locations while we got NCMEC on the phone immediately. The stream was still active, and we could see details in the background like a specific thermostat model on the wall. Why would Conrad leave such obvious evidence in a storage unit he knew Mom had seen him visit? Something feels off about him keeping financial records in a place she could lead us to when he's been so careful with everything else. The door hardware looked commercial grade, and the carpet had this diamond pattern that seemed familiar. Dion cross-referenced everything and found it matched a particular hotel chain with 4 locations in the metro area. We started calling each location while working on warrant paperwork. The manager at the 3rd hotel recognized Conrad's photo, even though he'd checked in under the name Robert Hayes a week ago. The security footage showed him hauling in several bags, and he'd paid cash for 2 weeks up front. We got the warrant signed by a judge at 10 that night and rolled up with a full tactical team. But when we breached the door, the room was empty except for the smell of bleach and some furniture moved around. The forensics team found evidence that someone had definitely been filming there, including tape residue on the carpet and walls where lights had been mounted. The tech team started bagging everything while I went through the trash can by the desk. Found a crumpled receipt from a dry cleaner 3 blocks away with yesterday's date on it. We drove there right away, and the guy behind the counter remembered Conrad because he'd paid for rush service on 3 suits. Said he was with a younger woman who kept checking her phone and looking nervous. The timestamp showed this was 4 hours after we'd talked to him at the airport, which meant he was still moving around the city like nothing had happened. Back at the office, my phone rang, and it was Tyler sounding panicked. Mom had called her crying and saying Conrad had somehow found out she'd talk to us. He'd left a voicemail on her burner phone saying he knew what she'd done and that she'd regret it. We moved her to a different safe house within the hour, while Emmett and I argued about whether keeping her involved was worth a risk. She was our only inside source, but Conrad clearly had ways of tracking information we didn't understand yet. 2 days later, Mom started calling the office every few hours demanding to talk to me personally. Said she had something important that she'd only share face-to-face and not through lawyers or other agents. Darren finally agreed to set up a controlled meeting at a coffee shop downtown with 4 agents stationed around the building. I sat across from her at a corner table while she fidgeted with her coffee cup. She started saying something about being sorry for everything when I was a kid, but I cut her off and told her to just give me the information. She leaned in and whispered that Conrad did his real business at a co-working space called The Hub on Jefferson Street. Said he thought it was safe because the membership wasn't in his name, and he always used guest passes that his friend bought. The next morning, we had a judge sign a warrant for the Hub's records and security footage. The manager was nervous but cooperative and pulled up their system right away. Sure enough, there were records of someone matching Conrad's description coming in 3 or 4 times a week, always signing in as a guest of someone named Marcus Webb. The security footage showed him carrying a laptop bag and heading straight to the private phone booths in the back every time. Dion got a court order to set up network monitoring at the Hub and installed the equipment that night after they closed. Within 3 days, we captured login activity from accounts we'd been tracking for months, including Blue Raven 47's main profile. The IP addresses matched perfectly, and the timestamps lined up with when Conrad was visible on the security cameras. We finally had direct digital evidence connecting him to the online identity we'd been hunting. Emmett spent the next week coordinating with the prosecutor's office to prepare simultaneous raids. We'd hit Conrad's apartment, the storage unit we'd found records for, and the Hub all at the same time to prevent anyone from warning the others. The arrest warrants were signed and sealed while while our tactical teams reviewed building layouts and entry points. The morning of the raids, I was assigned to the hub team since I knew Conrad's patterns there best. We went in at 7 when the place had just opened and only a few people were working. Found Dwayne in one of the backphone booths with his laptop open and logged into 3 different Blue Raven 47 accounts. He froze when he saw our badges, then immediately started talking about wanting to make a deal. Within an hour, he was in an interview room with his lawyer, spilling everything he knew. Gave us Conrad's real name, which turned out to be James Conrad Hewitt, and said he'd been staying at a friend's house in Royal Oak since the airport incident. Confirmed there were at least 12 victims that he knew about personally, and provided the cryptocurrency wallet addresses they used for payments. Said Conrad kept backup drives in a safety deposit box at a bank on Woodward, and had destruction protocols set up on all his devices. The arrest team started planning immediately, knowing we'd only get one chance at this. The house in Royal Oak was a 2-story colonial on a quiet street with good sightlines in all directions. Tactical unit would go in first, since Conrad might be armed based on Dwayne's information about him keeping a pistol in his car. Digital forensics had a mobile lab ready to preserve any evidence before Conrad could trigger his destruction protocols. The prosecutors were on standby to handle the initial appearance and make sure bail was set high enough to keep him locked up. 2 hours after Conrad was locked up, Tyler called my cell while I was still at the office filling out paperwork. Mom was screaming in the background about someone pounding on her old apartment door asking where she was. Tyler put her on speaker, and I could hear her crying about how Conrad must have sent someone to find her. The marshals called back within 20 minutes, confirming a man had been asking neighbors about Mom's whereabouts. They moved her that same night to a secure hotel 40 miles away, with 2 agents posted outside her door. I stayed at the office until 3 in the morning, working with a team to adjust our timeline since Conrad clearly had people on the outside. The next morning, we decided to grab Conrad during a traffic stop instead of raiding the friend's house where he was staying. State police pulled him over for a broken taillight on I-75 near Troy, while our team waited 2 blocks away. Conrad had 3 phones in his pocket and a laptop bag on the passenger seat when they cuffed him. The digital team grabbed everything before he could wipe anything and rushed it all to the lab for analysis. I watched through the one-way glass as Conrad sat in the interview room picking at his cuticles while we waited for his lawyer to show up. The attorney walked in wearing a $1,000 suit and immediately told Conrad not to say a single word to anyone. Conrad just nodded and stared at the wall while Darren tried every angle to get him talking about the kids. The lawyer kept repeating that his client would exercise his right to remain silent on all matters. After 2 hours, we gave up and sent Conrad to county lockup while the forensics team started working on his devices. The next week, an email showed up from the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility saying they were opening an inquiry into my conduct. Someone had leaked that I was related to a key witness in the case, and they needed to investigate potential conflicts. I spent 3 days writing reports and sitting through interviews explaining every decision I'd made since Mom walked into that interview room. The Detroit Free Press ran a story about the arrest, but hadn't connected Mom to me yet, though reporters kept calling the office. Emmett laid out all the charges on a whiteboard in the conference room while we prepped for the grand jury. Production of child exploitation material carried 20 years. Sex trafficking of minors could get life, and the conspiracy charges added another 20. He circled Mom's name on the board and explained how her testimony would connect Conrad's online handle to his real identity. Without her, we'd have to rely on technical evidence that his lawyer would attack as circumstantial. The bail hearing happened 3 days after the arrest in federal court downtown. Conrad's lawyer argued for house arrest with electronic monitoring, saying his client had strong community ties and no prior record. The prosecutor showed the judge photos from Conrad's laptop of kids as young as 6 being abused. She pointed out that Conrad had already tried to intimidate a witness by sending someone to Mom's apartment. The judge barely looked up from the evidence before ordering Conrad held without bail as a danger to the community. Our forensics team worked around the clock analyzing Conrad's devices and found folders with videos from 32 different kids. The metadata showed victims in Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Pennsylvania, New York, and Wisconsin. Each folder had the kid's real name, address, and screenshots of their conversations with Conrad pretending to be a teenage boy. We had to start calling parents to tell them their children had been victimized by an online predator. I made 6 of those calls myself and listened to mothers sob and fathers punch walls when they realized what had happened. One dad in Cleveland drove 8 hours to our office just to look at Conrad's photo and memorize his face. Mom started calling Tyler every day complaining about the hotel food and demanding money for cigarettes and snacks. She wanted a better room with a kitchenette and threatened to change her mind about testifying if we didn't give her cash. Tyler told her she was getting exactly what the agreement specified and nothing more, but she kept pushing. Emmett finally got on the phone and told her flat out that any more demands would result in termination of her protection. She screamed that we needed her more than she needed us and hung up on him. Something feels off about how easily Dwayne flipped on Conrad the second they caught him. Makes me wonder if he was planning to cut a deal all along or if there's another angle here we're not seeing yet. 2 days later, she called back crying and apologizing, saying she was just scared and stressed about testifying. The Office of Professional Responsibility wrapped up their investigation after 2 weeks of interviews and document reviews. They gave me a formal counseling letter that would stay in my file for 3 years, but let me keep working the case. Darren wrote a statement for the file noting that my actions had directly led to removing a dangerous predator from the streets. The review board acknowledged that while I should have recused myself immediately, the results justified keeping me on the team. We spent the next month preparing for trial while Mom got more and more unstable at the safe house. She called reporters trying to sell her story, ordered pizza delivery to the hotel against security protocols, and told the marshals she was being held prisoner. Emmett met with the prosecution team to discuss moving forward without her testimony if she completely fell apart. The digital evidence was strong, and Dwayne had agreed to testify about Conrad's methods and victim selection process. Conrad's laptop had enough evidence to convict him 20 times over, but Mom's testimony would seal the deal by proving Conrad was the person behind the screen name. We decided to keep working with her despite the problems since her testimony could mean the difference between 20 years and life without parole. 3 weeks into witness prep, Mom started missing meetings, and when Tyler went to check on her at the safe house, he found it empty except for a note on the kitchen counter that just said she couldn't do this anymore. He called me right away and we started checking every drug house and hospital in Detroit, but she was gone like she'd never existed at all. The marshals put out alerts and Detroit PD PD ran welfare checks at all the known spots on 8 Mile, but Mom knew how to disappear when she wanted to, and she'd had 20 years of practice. Without her testimony, we had to rebuild the whole case strategy, and Emmett worked 18-hour days getting everything ready, while I kept searching for Mom, even though I knew she was probably already dead in some abandoned house. 8 months later, the trial finally started, and our prosecutor laid out the evidence piece by piece, starting with the digital forensics that showed thousands of images and videos on Conrad's devices. Dwayne took the stand on day 3 and walked the jury through how Conrad ran his operation and picked victims and set up the payment systems through cryptocurrency. The forensics experts spent 2 days explaining the technical evidence and showing how we could trace every file back to Conrad's IP address and devices. Conrad's defense attorney tried to argue that someone else could have used his computer, but the evidence was too strong with timestamps and location data, and Conrad's own messages to victims. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury went into deliberations, and we waited in the courthouse hallway drinking bad coffee and checking our phones every 5 minutes. They came back after 4 days with guilty verdicts on 12 counts, but they deadlocked on 8 others where the evidence wasn't as direct. Conrad got 40 years just on the counts they convicted on, but his lawyer filed appeals before we even left the courthouse. 2 months later, at sentencing, the judge gave Conrad consecutive sentences that added up to basically life in prison and talked about the exceptional cruelty and planning in his crimes. The families of the victims sat in the courtroom, and some cried with relief while others looked angry that not all the charges stuck. I spent the next week on the phone with parents trying to explain why the jury didn't convict on everything and how the appeals process worked and what they could expect going forward. Some thanked me for getting any conviction at all, while others screamed that the system had failed their kids again. The burnout hit me hard after that, and Emmett made me take a month of administrative leave to get my head straight. I started seeing a therapist twice a week and tried to process everything that had happened with Mom in the case and my whole messed up life. The therapist kept asking how I felt about Mom disappearing, but I couldn't even figure that out myself because part of me was relieved she was gone, and part of me was terrified she was dead somewhere. 6 months after the trial ended, Detroit PD called about a Jane Doe overdose victim they found in an abandoned house off Jefferson, and the description matched Mom. They were running DNA tests, but I already knew it was her before they even called with the confirmation a week later. She'd been dead for probably 2 months before anyone found her, and there was no way to know if it was intentional or just another overdose in a city full of them. I kept going to therapy and working through everything while new cases piled up on my desk. The Ohio girl's parents sent me a photo of her at her high school graduation, and I kept it on my desk as a reminder that we'd saved at least one kid, even if we couldn't save them all. Conrad's network led to 5 more arrests, and each one opened up new investigations and new victims, and the work just kept coming. Some days I could handle it fine, and other days I'd have to leave the office and sit in my car until I could breathe again. The other agents knew about my background by then, and nobody said anything when I needed to step out during certain briefings. I kept working cases and putting predators away, and trying not to think about how I was basically doing the same thing over and over, hoping for a different result. Every kid we rescued felt like a small victory, but there were always 10 more cases waiting and 10 more predators operating in the shadows. The work never stopped, and neither did I, because stopping meant thinking too much about everything, and that was worse than just pushing through. My therapist said I was making progress, but some days it didn't feel like it when I was looking at evidence photos that could have been me 30 years ago. I stayed in crimes against children because it was the only thing that made sense, even when nothing else did, and maybe that was enough of a reason to keep going. Thanks for hanging out and wondering about all this with me today. Really cool getting to share this time together. See you around. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.